The third act of Night in the Woods kicks off at the conclusion of the second and final ghost hunting segment. At the time, May is checking out historic locations around Possum Springs with Greg, Bee, and Angus in search of what she believes to be the poltergeist who kidnapped the teenager back at Harfest. She can visit the Historical Society with Greg, the graveyard with Bee, or Possum Jump with Angus. But she only gets to do 2 of these, because whichever one she goes to second will immediately usher the player towards the climax once it's over. No matter where you go, the same thing will happen. As May is leaving the area with her chosen companion, she'll have a mental health episode and black out. There's a bit more to it than that, but we'll get into all that later in the video. When May wakes up, she'll ask her chosen companion to gather up the troops, the rest of the party bar and garage band. There's something she needs to share with them, and it can't wait any longer. The group gathers at Greg and Angus's apartment, where May opens up about what she's been going through since her return to Possum Springs. She reiterates her belief that a ghost is behind all of this. She thinks it's been stalking her and messing with her head, causing her to have weird dreams and blackouts like the one she experienced earlier. May's friends are skeptical. They think there are far better explanations for what she's going through, but they do believe that something is going on with her. So when May decides to venture out into the woods, where she believes the answers to this mystery can be found, they gladly go with her, determined to support their friend. Title of the game aside, the woods might seem like an odd place for May to visit at this point in the game, but if you think back to the night of the kidnapping, that is where she saw the supposed ghost flee with the kidnapped teen, and she did dream about the woods later that night. Up until now, it hasn't seemed like a priority because Aunt Molly already searched it and didn't find anything. If you're curious about why I think she didn't find anything, you should check out these 2 videos for my Night in the Woods theory series. In the woods, May and her friends come upon a horrifying sight. A cult of hooded figures, dressed just like May's ghost. They're gathered around one of their members, Lerv, and are about to execute him for breaking the rules of their group. As it turns out, Lerv was responsible for leaving the severed arm outside of the Click-Clack, which May and company discovered way back on the game's first full day. After Lerv dies, May gasps, at which point one of the cult members notices her. It's important to note that this cult member doesn't just spot her, he calls her out by name, which seems to imply that he has a high level of familiarity with her, and might even know her personally. If you'd like to hear my speculation about who this particular cult member is, you should check out this video, which explores the possibility that 2 of May's neighbors, Mr. Penderson and Mr. Twigmeyer, are cult members. May and her friends try to run away, but the cultists give chase. After a brief gameplay segment, one of them fires a gun at May, and the screen cuts to black. With our protagonist in some serious peril, one of the game's final chapters, the end of everything, begins. To kick off the end of everything, the player is given control of the companion they spent the most time with, either Bee or Greg. They're hiding out at Greg and Angus's apartment with the rest of the group as they try to evade the watchful eye of the cult. They mention that one of the cultists is watching them from across the street, and are concerned about even ordering a pizza. But most importantly, they're worried about May, whose condition remains in doubt. Eventually, there's a mysterious knock at the door, which the gang realizes must be her. The game's narrative then backtracks a bit to show us what's been going on with her since she was attacked by the cult. We see her walking through the woods, navigating an apocalyptic version of Possum Springs, and unconscious on a church bench as all the minor characters the player interacted with pray for her recovery. The mysterious janitor then shows up, at which point we transition to a hospital room, where her parents and Pastor K are waiting for her to wake up. The precise nature of a few of these scenes is a subject of debate here in the Night in the Woods community. Some folks argue that what we see in the church and the hospital are things that actually happened. Others believe they're dreams. Personally, I think it's a little of column A and a little of column B. I think they're dreams with some truth sprinkled in. For example, Armageddon Possum Springs is obviously a dream. I think the same is true of the church scene. If you talk to Lori M in the epilogue, she doesn't seem to remember it. She says that she heard May was in the hospital. If what we see in the church actually happened, she wouldn't have heard that May was in the hospital, she'd know it for certain. and Pastor K, who is present at both the church and the hospital, doesn't reference either scene in the epilogue. However, during the same conversation with Lori M that I just mentioned, May does confirm that she did spend some time in the hospital, just as you'd expect for someone who was in a coma-like state. So I suspect that although May was indeed there, what we see happening in that scene is still just a dream. Her mother and father were likely there with her, but I doubt Pastor K was, and I'm sure the same is true of the mysterious janitor. As for the part in the woods, I suspect that is where she was found, but I doubt she walked out of there under her own power. Furthermore, the dialogue in both scenes is rather on the nose, which is what you'd expect from a dream. And from a gameplay perspective, the primary function of the church segment, in my opinion, is to show the player the impact May has had on the lives of others, not deliver concrete information. For all of these reasons, I really do think these are dreams with some elements of truth to them. It's what I think makes the most sense, and I'll likely put out a video at some point down the line to explain why I feel this way in greater detail. In any case, after these dreams or memories play out, May wakes up in her bed and stumbles her way to Greg and Angus's apartment. There, she continues to rest, and later eats some pizza with the group while they fill in the gaps about what's happened since they were chased by the cult. They confirm that May fell from a significant height in the woods, and slipped into a coma-like state. They also inform her that it was the team of Aunt Molly and another cop who fished her out of the woods. I suspect that the other cop was Dan McConnell, who helped Molly search the woods for May's ghost after Harfest. In this video, I put forth the theory that Dan McConnell is a cultist, and might even be the one who took the shot at May the night before. If you'd like to check it out, I'll leave a link down in the description box. Once May's ready to get back to bed, Germ rolls out, setting him up for a big part in the finale. May then crashes on the couch, where she's joined by your preferred companion. Here, in one of the game's most important moments, May finally talks about the mental health issues she's been struggling with since her teenage years. Throughout the game, if you've been paying close attention, you'll hear frequent references to the killer incident, a harrowing moment from May's past where she attacked a kid named Andy Cullen with a bat during a softball game. Up until this point, the details on why she did this have been unclear. But in this heart-to-heart with your preferred companion, she reveals that her outburst was triggered by an episode of disassociation. Now, whenever she's in a new place or around new people, these episodes happen again, with the implication being that she is, of course, terrified of having another outburst. And unfortunately for May, college only made things worse. She explains that she was doing alright at college for a while, but she struggled to make friends, and eventually the avant-garde statue of the school's founder, which sat outside her dorm room, became a major trigger for her. The appearance of the statue, with its shape-based design, reminded May of her dissociative episodes. She felt like it was looking down at her, judging her, and scared her so much that she stopped leaving her room. This statue, of course, is the same one we see in the game's very first dream segment, which May destroyed with a bat, a symbolic representation of what she surely wanted to do to the real version. This revelation about May's history of dissociative episodes is key to understanding the game and its conclusion. Now we know what happened to May at the end of the final ghost hunting segment. She was having the beginnings of a dissociative episode, one that didn't end up with her having an outburst, I suspect, because of the presence of her friends and the fact that she's in a familiar location. Taking this a step further, May mentions at several points during the final act that she feels like there's something messing with her head. In doing so, she's drawing an explicit connection between her dissociative episodes and her dreams. At this point, she believes that her ghost is responsible for all of this. But as she'll soon learn, the truth is much darker than she ever believed. Once her preferred companion goes to sleep, May sneaks out of the apartment. She knows that it's her that the cult is after, and that her mental illness is somehow tied up in all of this. So she ventures out into the woods, and at last comes face to face with her mysterious ghost. She challenges him to talk, to reveal who he is and explain everything that's been going on since she returned to Possum Springs. When the ghost doesn't speak, May decides it's time to throw hands, and takes a step forward. But before she can engage the ghost, a crossbow bolt flies into the frame, striking the mysterious figure in the shoulder. He screams, revealing that he is, quite clearly, not a ghost, but a living, breathing person, no different than the cultists the night before. What exactly the cultist formerly known as May's ghost is doing here, being all creepy and mysterious, is up for debate, but I've always suspected that they're keeping an eye out for May. After what happened the night before, the cult knows they've reached a crossroads with May, knows that she'll be coming into the woods in search of answers, and probably wants to be prepared for her arrival. This also aligns with the so-called ghost's behavior in the 3 ghost hunting segments, where he's clearly tracking May's whereabouts. Thus, I think he's here to serve as a scout for the cult, and was supposed to report back to the other members before May challenged him to a fight. For reasons that will become clear later on, I think he did want to mix it up with our protagonist, but the crossbow bolt in his shoulder ruined those plans. The source of the crossbow bolt is, of course, the ever-timely Greg, who arrives on the scene along with Bee and Angus. Just like the night before, they've come to support their friend, and are prepared to see this journey through to the end. The so-called ghost flees, but May and her friends follow, and eventually end up outside the mine from the night before. They enter it and take an old service elevator down into its depths. Eventually, the group will find a church, where it seems the cult has been worshipping something. It's not clear what just yet, before finally coming face to face with the cultists. It's here, in this all-important showdown with these hooded, mysterious, murderous uncles, that the game's many plot threads come together. They confirm that May's ghost is indeed not a ghost. He's just another one of their members, who goes by the name of Ide. And it's not him who's been in her head this whole time. It's an eldritch entity known as the Black Goat, which resides in a bottomless hole in the mine, the very same hole that's just a few feet away from her and her friends. They explain that since the 90s, when the factories and businesses moved out of Possum Springs, they've been making periodic sacrifices to the Black Goat in the hopes that it will revitalize the town's economy. They have circumstantial evidence that the Black Goat is indeed following through on its end of the bargain. They mention flowers blooming on the hills after one of the sacrifices. But the validity of this is suspect at best, and based on everything we see in-game, the town's economy certainly does not seem to be improving. As for their victims, they claim that they always choose people who won't be missed, delinquents, drunks, and vagrants, which has allowed them to remain under the radar. Lerv, who was killed by the cult the previous evening, nearly exposed their whole operation when he left the arm of the person he selected for sacrifice outside of the click-clack, and thus, the cult felt that they had no choice but to execute him. We're still never told how exactly the arm ended up being cut off in the first place, but if you'd like to hear a few theories about what I think might have happened, you should check out this video on the topic from last year. During this conversation, it becomes clear to May and her friends that one of the cult's previous victims must have been their old friend Casey Hartley, who went missing before the events of the game. The cultists admit to sacrificing him, and use Casey's association with his cousin, who supposedly died in a Breaking Bad-style meth lab explosion, to justify their actions. Now, before we go on, let's talk about the symbolism at play here. I'm often asked if all of this stuff about the cult and the Black Goat is meant to be taken literally, or if it's an allegory for the decline of Rust Belt America and the self-destructive beliefs of many conservative groups in those regions. It's a good question, and in my opinion, the answer is that it's both. In-game, these things are indeed happening. Poor, unfortunate people who the cult deemed to be undesirables, like Casey and the Harfest kid, were really sacrificed, and the cult clearly believes that continuing to do so is the path to restoring Possum Springs to its former glory. But it is also an allegory. Go to any downtrodden community in America and you'll inevitably find people and politicians ready to blame the decline of their towns and cities on the same folks targeted by the cult. People and politicians who readily believe that someday the mines and factories will come back to the States, and that all they need to do to achieve this idealistic, nostalgia-fueled future is to sacrifice the so-called undesirables. It's a mentality driven by xenophobia, bigotry, and fear, and we see that in the cult's every word and action. In this way, everything that happens here at the end of the game really is both in-game reality and an allegory. Events that are indeed happening, but are also laden with metaphors that touch on real-world events. In terms of the game's more supernatural elements, such as May's dreams or astral projection sequences, her belief that the Black Goat is in her head, and Ide's ability to walk through walls, which he demonstrated back at Harfest, the cult attributes all of this to something called the glimmer. The glimmer, according to the cult, is a gift that the Black Goat bestows on people it takes a particular liking to. those with the glimmer have a deep connection to the Black Goat, as well as special abilities. One of the first to have the glimmer was Ed Scudder, who discovered the hole in the mine in the first place, and could also walk through walls, which has led myself and others to speculate that he's related to Ide. I think he's probably either his father or grandfather. Circling back to Casey, the mention of his sacrifice, as one would expect, escalates the situation between May's comrades and the cult. Greg raises his crossbow, determined to get vengeance for his fallen friend. The cult counters, as one of their members takes up a rifle, and for a brief time there's a legit standoff down in the mines, until Greg relents and drops his weapon. The cult then reveals the real reason they've allowed May to enter their inner sanctum, and explained all of their methods to her. They're getting older, and even with the benefit of good health afforded to them by the Black Goat, they won't be around forever, and need new blood to keep the cult going until Possum Springs is restored to its former glory. Of course, the gang turns them down, but they essentially ask them to consider the offer and get back to them. During this part of the conversation, while the cult leader is describing what they believe will happen to Possum Springs if they don't keep making sacrifices to the Black Goat, May has another disassociative episode, one that ends with her finishing the cult leader's sentence by saying that the town will eventually be reduced to just, quote, shapes. This is the developer's way of reminding us that there's still a mental health piece to all of this that needs to be explored, and that has its own connection to the Black Goat, one that will be expanded upon later in the finale. With the disassociative episode over, the cult lets May and her friends go. They're not afraid of her. May and her friends don't know who they are under their hoods, and they doubt the police would believe any of what she's seen down here. I also suspect that this is because there are members of the police department in the cult, like Dan McConnell, who seems to have done a great job of keeping Molly in the dark about their activities. Only one cultist objects to the cult leader's decision to spare May and her friends: Ide. Ide clearly wants vengeance for his bolted shoulder, but he also mentions that the other cult members don't know the Black Goat as well as he does. The implication here, I believe, is that Ide fears that at some point down the line, the cult might decide to replace him with May, because she too has the glimmer. Just as the cult fears the so-called undesirables replacing them in the community of Possum Springs, so too does Ide fear that he will eventually be replaced by our protagonist. May and her cohorts take the elevator out of the depths, and are about to leave the mine when they're attacked by Ide. Your preferred companion will come to her defense, at which point May will kick off Ide's helmet, revealing that he's a cat. This, to me, only deepens the likelihood that Ide feared he'd be eventually replaced by May. When he saw May, he saw a younger version of himself, another cat with the glimmer, with a deep connection to the Black Goat that once empowered him. The service elevator then comes crashing down on Ide, severing his arm, a callback to the beginning of the game, and causing the entire mine to cave in. Trapped somewhere beneath the earth, May and her friends find their way to a cavern with a small body of water. I believe that this body of water is the same spring mentioned in the Harfest play, which tells the origin story of the town itself. When May reaches the midway point of the water, she falls into it and has an encounter with the Black Goat. May's showdown with the Black Goat here in the void of space is just as critical as the conversation with the cult, and it uses the same real events but also allegory formula. Here, May comes to the realization that the Black Goat is responsible for all the battles she's been fighting in her mind these last few years. The Black Goat is not only her source of the glimmer, and thus her dreams or astral projection sequences, but also her episodes of depersonalization and depression. This, by extension, means that the Black Goat is, in its own way, responsible for the killer incident. Thus, it really is the source of so many of May's problems, from her status as a social outcast, to her family's economic hardships, and the fear she felt out at college. It's had its hooks in her since her teenage years, and at long last, our protagonist has an opportunity to fight back against it. And fight back she does. She tells the Black Goat that she's not going to let it control her anymore. She says that after the killer incident, she repressed so many of her emotions and lived in fear of another outburst. But now, she's ready to feel the whole spectrum of human emotions again. Even loss, a feeling she's been trying to avoid since the death of her grandfather. And now, May knows that if she feels lost when something ends, then it means that it mattered. Finally, she says that though she knows she won't be free of the Black Goat and its impact on her forever, all she needs is to be free of it right now. Now, that's the literal interpretation of all of this, but again, part of what makes Night in the Woods such a great game is that there's an allegory here as well. The black goat is really just a giant metaphor for mental illness. When you're dealing with any form of mental illness, be it anxiety, depression, or depersonalization, it feels eldritch in its strength and scope. It feels impossible to explain to anyone. No one else is in your head but you. You can tell someone what it's like to have an anxiety attack all you want. You can put it in the most eloquent or most relatable of terms, but at the end of the day, for an outsider who's never experienced the same thing, it's about as impossible to comprehend as an eldritch entity. It's such brilliant symbolism, and by standing up to the black goat here, May is essentially telling her mental illness to fuck right off. It's a powerful moment and a huge part of what makes this game so relatable to so many people. If you're watching this video and wondering why Night in the Woods is a cult classic, it's moments like this one right here. When May wakes up, she's back in the cavern with her friends. The dialogue makes it pretty clear that she didn't actually sink into the water. She just sort of blinked out for a moment. Eventually, May and her friends find their way to the bottom of the well, the same well mentioned in the Harfest play. Using her cat skills, May climbs out of it in what is yet another beautifully symbolic moment. She already roundhouse kicked her mental illness, but here she's demonstrating her growth by climbing out of the pit it tossed her into and making sure that her friends don't get trapped down there as well. May eventually emerges in the woods and exits from the well we saw her walk up to in her dream the night after Harfest, tying up yet another loose end. Before she can even begin to think about how to get her friends out of there, Germ, who, if you recall, went home on his own earlier, shows up at the well. It turns out that this well is in his backyard, which might have something to do with his grandmother's seemingly prophetic abilities, which you can see firsthand if you complete his side quest. Germ gets some rope, which he uses to pull Bee, Greg, and Angus out of the well. Everyone's favorite bird then comes up in the clutch one more time by tossing some dynamite down the well, closing off access to the mines. In doing so, the crew has likely doomed the cult and all of its members to a slow, agonizing death down in the mines. The front entrance caved in when the elevator came crashing down, and now Germ's explosives have closed off the hidden exit in the well. There's probably no other way out of the mines, meaning that the cult probably ends up starving to death in the Black Goat's lair. As for Ide, I'm often asked if I think he survived the cave-in, and though I will admit that his odds are somewhat better thanks to the Glimmer, he did lose a whole ass arm. The Glimmer might allow him to walk through walls, but it doesn't cauterize wounds, so I'm fairly certain that he bled out long before the cultists started going all Donner Party on each other. After dooming the cult, May and her friends head back to their respective homes. Over Messenger, May delivers a heartfelt address to her friends, where she thanks them for everything they've done for her, expresses how much she cares for and appreciates them, and reflects on the overall insanity of everything they just experienced. One of the major details that folks often mention about this particular scene in regards to its implications for the ending is the fact that during Bee's scene, her father is noticeably absent from the couch, where he spends the majority of his time during the dinner at Bee's hangout. If you recall, he even sleeps there, and it's not entirely clear if he even has a bedroom of his own. Remember, this is a small apartment that they were forced to move into after they lost their home. Because of this, many have wondered if Bee's father is, in fact, a member of the cult. I don't personally subscribe to this theory, but I do think it's possible, and I will say that it's more likely than some of the other characters folks suspected being cult members, who we'll talk about in a few minutes here. In the epilogue, many of the game's minor plot lines are resolved. May agrees to tell her parents over dinner that night about everything that's been going on with her. I suspect that she intends to tell them about her mental illness and why she left college, but I doubt she plans on telling them about the cult and the Black Goat. I can't imagine that would go over too well. May's father, Stan, muses about unionizing and leading a strike at Ham Panther, the grocery store where he works. If May has found the mysterious tooth hidden by her grandfather in the crawl space of her house, a symbol of the old militant unions of Possum Springs, she can hand it to him as a form of encouragement. She can also check in with Lori M., invite her to Thanksgiving dinner, and even have a final conversation with the esoteric janitor. One of the most intriguing conversations May can have during the epilogue is this one here, with her Aunt Molly. Obviously, her presence here rules her out as a potential cult member. In the original version of the game, she was conspicuously absent from the epilogue, which led to many theories about her that were disproven when the weird Autumn edition dropped about a half a year later. However, Aunt Molly does mention that she received some strange calls the previous night, which would seem to indicate that there are probably a lot of folks out there looking for their suddenly missing murderous uncles. I mean, family and friends. The fact that she can be found on this particular street leads me to believe that one of May's neighbors, either Mr. Penderson or Mr. Twigmeyer, is a cult member, and that she's here to check in on a call from someone who reported them missing. The city council, who also weren't in the epilogue of the original game, are here as well, arguing about the town's preparedness for the winter season. Just like with Aunt Molly, their presence here rules them out as cult members, though I wouldn't be surprised if one or two of them is aware or even tacitly approves of the cult's actions. Finally, the game ends with May dropping by the party barn to reunite with the rest of the crew. She'll start out by talking with her preferred companion and digging deep about everything they experienced. One subject that comes up in both versions of the ending is what they should tell Casey's parents now that they know definitively what happened to him. As dark and terrible as the truth may be, they've been putting up missing persons posters for him all over town in the desperate hope that their son will come home someday. Ultimately, they're unsure of what to do about this and end up deciding to deal with all of these big questions about their old friend Casey, the cult, and more tomorrow. Depending on your preferred companion and the dialogue option you choose, May will then deliver one of several hopeful messages, focusing on the importance of living for today and enjoying the present without fear for the future or letting the past drag you down. Then, May asks the group to order a pizza and play a song, some comfort food and a comfort activity for the members of the Party Barn Garage Band. And with that, Night in the Woods comes to an end. It's a conclusion that continues to perplex many players due to the fact that it's a slice-of-life game combined with the magic realism and allegorical elements I mentioned earlier. But given this unique combination of styles, I really do think it's the perfect ending to this cult classic game. Thanks for watching. Big thanks to my Night in the Woods collaborators Wolf.Godwin, Allan Naslund, and Jordi Jaen Moreno. To check out all three of these talented creators, just follow the links down below in the description box. Big shout out to all my Silver and Gold tier YouTube channel members and Patreon subscribers, including James Pruitt, Corey Matson, Gustavo Balabi, Lil Caesar, Reed, Bedonian, Faith G, Anna Novikova, and Laura Parenti, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you guys next time. And go Birds!